Hey everybody, how's it going? Hope you're having a lovely day. I'm feeling really out of it over the past few weeks. I've just bitten off more than I can chew. So I'm going to be reading from notes as I do this video. I just didn't have it in me to have all my points in my head like I usually do to have that kind of stream of consciousness video. So today what I wanted to do is I wanted to follow up on the video I did on Ross Scott and the campaign to stop killing games. For those of you who are not familiar with it, I did a video about 6 months ago on Ubisoft. There was an executive at Ubisoft that said people should become comfortable not owning games. You probably imagine what I think about this given my stances on right to repair and ownership. Anyway, moving on, the reason that this pissed a lot of people off is because Ubisoft was a perfect example of why this is a problem. There's a game called The Crew. This game is playable online when you connect to a server, but it also has a campaign mode and has single-player modes that are considerably usable. They're viable. There are people out there that like the single-player mode, and after Ubisoft decided to shut down the server, this single-player mode was no longer able to work. And this aggravated a lot of people that paid for the game. This game was not advertised as a service. There are games that are advertised as a service, but this was advertised as a game that you purchased, that you bought and paid for. And again, the meaning of the word purchase in America used to mean something with regards to ownership. If I bought a game and I have a copy of the game, I kind of figure I can keep playing that game in single player mode without having to connect to your server. So this pissed a lot of people off, including Mr. Ross Scott, who decided to try and push an initiative called Stop Killing Games. And you can read about that over here. You can read all the specifics of it. This is an EU initiative here. This is not a bill. This is not even a draft bill or a law. This is the EU's version of we've written down something on a napkin for consideration. Let's see if we can turn it into something later. Now, there's a person who really dug into this with a lot of criticism, and he's quite popular on YouTube. Mr. Pirate Software over here, his name is Thor, and from 10 hours and 24 minutes to 10 hours and 41 minutes in this particular video, he goes over everything that he believes is functionally wrong and useless with this campaign from the perspective of a video game developer. And a lot of people have been just shitting on him in the comments relentlessly, and I've had a lot of people email me shitting on him as well, and I don't think that that's really appropriate. I want to explain why. There was a class that I took recently where he had to go over some literature and some kind of poems and stuff like that. And I chose this one poem by Emmanuel Xavier. The work that I discussed really didn't consider any of the reasons that these problems occur. They didn't consider any of the shades of gray, any of the reasons that people may come to these decisions. It's just like you either agree with this or you're unreasonable. And I don't really like that. It's one thing to be bombastic when you're discussing something that aggravates you like I am in these videos. But when you are talking about legislation, you really do need to dig into the details and you have to understand why things are the way they are before you try to go about changing the world. And when I'm discussing legislation about whether it's John Deere or wheelchair stuff or right to repair in my field, I really do try to engage with the other party and try to figure out what their concerns are. What bothers me when it comes to stuff like Apple is they won't tell me what their real concerns are. They have this copy-pasted nonsense from lobbyists that is just, in my opinion, made up bullshit. But here you're actually hearing the criticisms from the perspective of a video game developer that's, whether you like it or not, is actually trying to engage in good faith. So just randomly shitting on this guy, I really think that that's a crappy thing to do, and I don't think it's appropriate. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to try and go through his criticisms, give some of my opinion on it, try to figure out how this could manifest in the real world, and then just go over some of my thoughts on it. So if I'm understanding it right, and feel free to correct me if I'm not, Mr. Thor, he believes that the initiative is too vague and it needs to be specific to single-player games that don't require a server for support. He's arguing that this would burden video game developers, so you would have to design games with this initiative in mind, that they are going to have to be playable even when the manufacturer, I'm so used to dealing with right to repair, when the publisher and developers turn off the server. The third is that there's some code that cannot be provided to customers because you can have licensing agreements on particular code where it's only available to the game developer, but they're not licensing the ability to give it to you. He feels that politicians don't understand video gaming and they're going to mess it up, and yeah, I understand that one. Whether it's politicians or industry lobbyists, they are kind of clueless, and I'll give you some examples later. And he states that retroactively applying this to all games would be a disaster. The law should not be retroactive. This is reasonable. To just completely shit on this guy, in my opinion, is not the way to get things done. You're also not going to get buy-in for people in the industry. And even if people in the industry don't particularly agree with you, you would rather at least kind of try and meet them in some way where instead they'll say, listen, I don't like this, versus I will dedicate my life to ensuring that this doesn't pass. Initiatives, they're not draft bills. So in the United States, we'll have an idea, you'll have a draft bill. With right to repair, there are bills from 2015 that were not passed until 2022 or 2023. There's literally 6 to 8 years of amendments that will go on before anything is passed, and that often requires input from all of the parties that will be affected by it. This over here is not even a draft bill. This is an initiative. So this is like going to McDonald's and I don't have a pen. I'm going to use ketchup on a napkin to draft out an idea. So I can understand why somebody would be concerned, but it's essentially written on a napkin. A lot of this stuff is stuff that will be changed with time. Even if the stakeholders of this don't want it changed, it's going to get changed with time. This is written on a napkin. There's no real genuine legalese here. He does quote from different articles, and we're going to go over some of those articles later. But again, this is not a law. Secondly, this initiative is not going to require games to be updated retroactively. When a right to repair bill passes, they don't have to go back through all their hardware from 1990 through 2023 and make parts and schematics and diagrams available, because that would be fairly unreasonable. What it usually means is not only does it not apply retroactively, it also applies in the future. So a bill that's passed in 2022 may say in it, this does not apply to anything created before May of 2024. So not only are they not going to require that this particular piece of legislation apply retroactively to everything, it also usually doesn't even apply until a date far into the future. The EU may do things a little bit differently, but from what I've seen, they have a date into the future, even in the EU, as to when it is they are going to apply. So I could completely understand a video game developer saying, do I really have to go back and patch code from 2004 for this? The amount of resources that may take a smaller studio or a smaller developer, that really is the type of thing that will be burdensome on them. It will be burdensome on a large company, but they pay for it, whereas a small company, I can imagine them going bankrupt over it. That's not going to apply in that case. Now, when it comes to live service gaming, there is this thing with advertising. If you're advertising a game as $5 a month, you are paying for this game as a service. You're paying $5 a month for the game. It runs on our server. We can shut this down at a given point in time, and once we shut it down, we will no longer charge you money. That's an honest transaction right there. And even if I don't like that model very much, I can respect the truth in advertising that exists here. The problem that I have is with a different type of live service game, where it is not sold as a live service game. It is sold as a game that you purchase. Something like The Crew, from what I see, and to be clear, I'm kind of ignorant here because I'm not really into the whole live service game thing. It doesn't look like this was sold as a live service game. It was sold in a manner where I, as a consumer who's not really hyper into the modern gaming community, would imagine that what I was purchasing was a game that I can continue to play single player without ever having to think about Ubisoft shutting down something into the future. If I bought that game, I would expect that I could continue playing it. So for me, it's not even necessarily about single player versus multiplayer. It's about how it was sold. If you sold the game as a purchase, that's different than you selling a rent leased service where it's $5 a month. I know at the end of the month I have to pay. If I don't pay at the end of the month, I don't get the game. And if you shut down the server, which you're allowed to do at any given time, I will not be billed anymore. There's a difference in the honesty there. And I think a lot of the problem that consumers have is not necessarily the concept of live service games versus games that are fully local. I think the problem that a lot of consumers have is the complete lack of honesty in the way that this is sold, which is something that it does need to be addressed. When it comes to licensing agreement, there's certain software that Thor mentioned that he may not even have a license to allow you to have. The license that he gets from whoever he's getting the code from, or the rights. I told you guys I was out of it. The rights to the trademarks for. This may be a license that he has as a dev, or he has, but he can't give that to you. So again, I'm just going to pull an example out of my ass here. Let's say you have a racing game. I don't know, like something like The Crew. I'm not saying that this game is done this way. I'm just trying to give you a hypothetical analogy. Let's say you have a game like this, and let's say that the physics for the car driving was not developed by Ubisoft. They got that code from somewhere else. That code may be code that they have a license to use for a certain period of time, but that may be code that they're not allowed to give you a license for permanently. So let's say they have a license for have that code for about 5 years. And let's also apply to something like a logo in a car. Let's say they have a Ferrari in there and they have a specific car, but they have to license the ability to have that within their game, to use their trademarks. That license may be for 5 years. Now, if that license ends, if they stop paying after 5 years, that means that you can't have access to it either, because they only paid for a temporary license. But you have that game which you purchased, which means they need a way to disable access to you. Now, the problem that I would have in that case is that they should advertise that this game is not going to work in 5 years because of a license that we have on the code, or a license that we have on the logos, license we have on the material in that game. That's never really put out there. Now, one of the arguments to be made here is that the manufacturer of the game, the developer of the game, may want to renew that license after 5 years if the game is still doing well. So if the game is not doing well, they shut off the server. But if the game is selling like hotcakes, they may decide that they want to renew that license. So they don't really want to pigeonhole themselves into a box by putting in the advertising materials, this game will not work on this date in 2028. Because if the game is still selling, they may want to continue having it work. And I understand that idea that the manufacturer wants to have that freedom into the future. However, So do the people who bought the fucking game. If I bought this game, I don't really care about your licensing agreements for the code. I don't care about your licensing agreements for any of this stuff, because back in the day, we didn't have to care. When you bought a game like Gran Turismo 2 on your PlayStation 1, you didn't have to worry about any of this. And there was no worry about licensing. All the cars in that game, a lot of them were real cars. Whatever licensing they worked out with any of the manufacturers of those cars, whatever license it was a license where I could continue to play Gran Turismo 2 today in my PlayStation 1. Either A, the code they used for the physics, I don't know what they did. Either A, they bought a right to use the code and to have a lifetime ability to use that code in that particular game, or B, they wrote the code for that themselves. Whatever it is, somehow, some way, back in the day, this was not an issue. And if the issue right now is that the licensing agreements for code or the licensing agreements for trademark, copyright, anything going into the game are such that you literally have to disable the game, even if it is capable of being run locally in single player mode, a law like this would throw a wrench into the works, yet I would argue that that's a wrench that needs to be thrown at some point in time. Because if the people licensing this code, or if the people licensing these trademarks are doing it in such a way that they're literally handcuffing the developers to the point where they couldn't even give you a server binary if you wanted it, that's a serious problem. Because this is something that I've really thought about for a while. Why not just give the users the server binary? Well, they may literally not legally be allowed. The developers may be handcuffed as a result of their arrangements with the people that they license the code or the trademarks or the copyright for whatever's in the game from. And if that's the case, if a law like this were passed, I imagine that would be kind of I hope, to be clear, I'm not going to say it would be, I hope that would be a negotiating stick for the developers and the publishers to say to the people that they're licensing the stuff from, hey man, these licensing agreements don't work anymore. I can't sell my game to hundreds of millions of people. I can't even offer this to them if you're going to do this. And at that point, I imagine that it would result in some sort of different negotiating style. Now, let's go down the whole rabbit hole of server binaries. One of the things that I would think, as somebody who's ignorant of all this, is if the game requires a server to run, why not just give them an EXE? I would think you should just give me the EXE for the server binary. If it runs on Spark, if it runs on a Pentium 1, if it runs on some random shit that you made, whatever it is, you would technically be in compliance with the law as long as you provided a server binary that allows somebody to spin up a server in their house. All you would have to modify in the game, in this this hypothetical case, I imagine, would be have a little fill-in box where you would change the address of the server that was hard-coded into the game with the address of your server. What this does not take into account, which is very important, is that most modern infrastructure, it's going to connect to buckets somewhere else. It's going to connect to containers and storage and databases that are somewhere else. So even if you were to give somebody the executable of the server, it wouldn't necessarily work because the game developer or the game publisher is still paying AWS. They're still paying for this bucket. They're still paying for this storage. They're still paying for this Snowflake database or whatever the hell else they're using. I have to be clear, I'm not a game developer, but you get the point here. Even if you give somebody the server binary, the way that they developed the game, they did not develop that server in a way where they could just hand it off to you. They didn't develop this using that 1990s concept of everything being local, or even the concept from 10 years ago of how cloud worked, where you're just using stuff on another computer. You may have a server that is connecting to 10 or 15 different computers in order to allow that game to work, and those 10 or 15 different computers that this one server is connecting to are all servers that have subscriptions for it. You're paying for AWS, subscription. You're paying for storage in this particular place, storage that is scalable over time in the way that S3 buckets at Amazon are scalable. They're paying for that. So to give somebody an EXE would be difficult. This would require that they rethink the entire concept of how the server is put together, which would be a serious problem if we are talking about games that came out 5 or 10 years ago. This would not be as easy as just giving somebody an EXE, depending on how the game was developed. If going forward they knew that they had this requirement, then the game may be developed differently. And he makes a good point here, which is you would have to rethink how you develop the game in order to be in compliance with this, and that could cause extra work. That would mean thinking about how to create this for local infrastructure, as well as creating it for if you're connecting to 5, 10 or different servers somewhere else. This would require one of two things. Behind door number one, you would provide the code open source and say, here you go, like, have fun. Set up your own S3 bucket, set up your own AWS, set up your own Microsoft Azure, set up your own Snowflake shit. Like, we gave you the source code, have fun. Or let's say you don't want to open source your game. You have no desire to open source your game. You want to keep it closed source. I understand that. You would have to design the server in a way where there's a local mode, maybe some sort of thing in Docker, like what Image does, or what Freegate does, or what Mailcow does. You would have to create some sort of local system like that, and then have your system, which is designed to be scalable. And this would mean designing with that in mind. Now, if this was a law that applied retroactively, I would say that this is completely unfair because that's a lot of freaking work to do for the past 10 years of shit. Being a law that may go into effect in 2026, 2027, 2028, I'm okay with it. Does it make things harder? Yes. If that's what's necessary to bring back ownership, I do think that that's worth it. It's not as much an issue with understanding, it's an ideological difference as to whether or not this should get pushed through. And I understand the game developer's perspective, which is I want to develop my game the way I want to develop my game. But I also understand the consumer's perspective, which is you use the word purchase here. You did not use the word service game that expires at this particular time. The instruction manual does not say if I don't pay $5 a month after this date, it won't work. The manual nor the box say that this game is going to turn off in 7 years. I want to keep playing my game. I understand that. So then it becomes an issue of which one of these is more important. And in my opinion, the one that leans a little bit more towards ownership is the one that matters. Providing support to people when they're running their own server. Even if you open source the server, even if you did that, you know, if you've been in a customer service-based business, that you are going to get a bunch of people bothering you. I have people that will email me asking questions on how to fix their own shit. After I've made 1,000 YouTube videos, I have instructional guides on my wiki that are 10 pages long. They will ask these questions and expect answers for free. And if I don't give answers to detailed questions for free, they will get mad at me. In other cases that I have people that will actually get mad at me because I don't fix things that I don't have the ability to fix because I cannot get parts anymore because they have not been available for 6 years. Somebody like this, who I'm not kidding, used to have the name Zeus the Mighty Oak, which was just, oh my God, that was hysterical, left me a 1-star review because I was not able to fix something. In my YouTube videos, this product was fixable in a video I did in 2014. The part stopped being available in decent condition 2015, arguably 2014, depending on who you're buying it from. 2015 passes, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. We're talking about a device that was manufactured in 2011. If I could fix it because I could get parts, I would. But I couldn't. The parts in the market were 99% shit. They were parts where people were scratching off the old date codes and putting on new ones to pretend that they were new when they were not. They were parts that I knew were going to fail 2 months after I put them on the board, if they even worked. So rather than tell them, yeah, sure, take this service, I'll give you a 45-day warranty and it'll die on 3 months, I said, I'm not going to do that. And what did I get in return for it? 1-star review. Customers can be unreasonable. So I understand when he says, if I make this server available, if I say, okay, fine, here's your server, learn how to set up Docker on your own, have fun. Even though that would technically be complying with the law, he would have a bunch of customer service requests that would be a royal pain in the ass. You can create a canned response in Freshdesk or your email software or whatever the hell you're using to handle tickets saying, this game is no longer supported. We are happy to make the code available to you. We're not going to charge you for the code. We're going to give you all the stuff you need to set up a server. Here's all the internal documentation. Or if you open source it, here's the source code. I can't walk you through how to set up a server, bro. This game is 9 years old. Sorry. And there are going to be people that understand that and are reasonable. There are going to be people that never even have to understand that because the first result on Google will be somebody else that's running that server for them that puts together a really great guide. And then you're going to have dickheads like this. And the thing is, even though you're going to have dickheads like this, in my opinion, they're going to wind up being the minority and they're not really going to destroy the reputation of your company. I have a lot of people that call me that are dicks like that. And it's a very, very small percentage of them that are actually petty enough to leave reviews because most of the time when you have people that are that petty, they know they're being petty. They know they're being assholes in their head and they feel some sense of shame about it, even though they're acting on their emotions when they call you. But they know they're being assholes, so they don't leave a review. And then there are a few of them that do, but even though I have to deal with a lot of assholes like that, 4.9 stars, 1,700 reviews, even before YouTube, archive.org, you'll see. 2 years before I started my YouTube channel, piled up of 5-star reviews. The initiative should address live service games that are designed to be massively multiplayer versus games with both campaign and multiplayer modes, where even the single player mode gets shut down. Personally, I would want this to apply across the board, but I could understand if it only applied to games where it was not sold this way. You have games that are sold as services, and then you have games that are sold as games. And I think that the initiative actually does make a good argument as to how it is this could already be separated. There's one particular word that is really important to me. We wish to invoke Article 17, squiggly shit 1 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, gobbledygook here. No one may be deprived of his or her possessions except in the public interest and in the cases under the condition provided for by law, subject to fair compensation being paid in good time for their loss. This practice deprives European citizens of their property by making it so that they effectively lose access to their product in an indeterminate, arbitrary amount of time after the point of sale. We wish to see this remedied at the core of this initiative. It says possession, so that really does go there to how was this sold. Something like the Crew, that is sold to me as a possession. It's not sold to me as a service. Now, it functions as a live service game. But simply because it has functions of a live service game does not mean that I'm going to refer to it that way. There are games that have the functionality of live service games that are sold as a possession, and then there are games that have the functionality of a live service game that are sold as a live service game. These are two very, very different things, and I think that's important. So one of the things that I went over in a video that I did a while ago was how Sony was selling things with their terms of service. They had said, here's all the stuff that's going to be removed from your library even though you purchased it. They did change their mind after a lot of consumer backlash, but there were a lot of items where they said that what you had bought and paid for was gone. Use of the terms own, ownership, purchase, sale, sold, rent, or buy in this agreement, or in connection with PSN content does not imply or mean transfer of ownership of any content data. Okay, so again, the intellectual property is not transferred. That makes sense. All content provided is licensed on a non-exclusive and revocable basis to you for personal, private, non-transferable, non-commercial, limited use. Here, they are actually trying to take the word purchase and just pretend that it means something it doesn't. If you have a live service game where you say this is a service that you are subscribing to, that is different from calling it a purchase. And my problem primarily with all of this has been when somebody calls something a purchase when it is not. You cannot use a contract to redefine the word purchase. If you call something purchase, but you have the ability to take it away from me, that is a rental or that is a lease. Do not call it something it is not, and do not use contracts to define it as something it is not. Now, you may think as a result of this, everybody's just going to call it a purchase of a revocable license. In the US, you could probably get away with that shit. In the EU, they do have clauses regarding misleading terms in contracts, so I don't believe in the EU you'd be able to get away with that. If you were saying that what you're buying is a fucking game, you're purchasing a game, in that case, they're not going to be able to get around this. They're not going to be able to do some sneaky shit that they probably could in the US. But if you're calling it a live service game, you're probably fine. Wouldn't be caught up in the blanket of this. A possession is something you own. A subscription is not something that you own. A live service is not something you own. So as long as it's advertised honestly, you don't have a problem with it. If your game is not advertised properly, then there is a serious problem with it. The consumer needs the ability to make an informed decision. And if you're selling it as something that can go away at any given time, or you're selling it saying, on October 7th, 2025, this game will never work again, fine. But if you don't have that in the terms and it's not obvious to the customer when they're buying it, that's where it's screwed up. And Thor said, this is essentially, paraphrasing, this is shitting on the developer's desk, then telling the developer they have the problem of all the shit that was placed on their desk. I don't like when somebody else just shits on my desk either. This is why this initiative came up in the first place. The reason this became an initiative is because so many companies were shitting on their consumer's desk by saying, I know that you bought a game, not a service, but we're going to take it away from you. When you've had millions of people that have had their desk shit on, I don't think that they're shitting on the developer's desk. I think from the perspective of that gamer that bought that game that no longer works, what they're doing is they're taking the shit off of their desk and they're shoveling it onto the developer and publisher where it belongs. People are sick and tired of shit like Destiny 2, Titanfall, Division, and just many others that screw you over when it comes to your ability to actually play those games. There are games that were able to be transitioned into something that you could run a server for from an online-only game. Gran Turismo Sport, Knockout City, Mega Man, Marvel Avengers, Estonia, City of Heroes. There are a lot of games where people were able to take this from an online-only, and once it was not supported anymore, transition it into a game that you could play without having to connect to the internet. I think that you do have to take these gentlemen's considerations seriously. Like, to look at this dude straight in the face and just say, F you, I'm not going to, like, there's nothing that you've said is reasonable. I'm not going to engage at all. You're an asshole simply because you disagree with what I said. I don't think that that's the way real activism works, and I don't think that actually gets anything done. I do think that you have to engage with a lot of his points, and you really do have to dig into all these details. And the thing is, I want to learn. With Apple and right to repair, I would love the real reason. When they say your privacy is at risk or your security is at risk if Lewis can get access to a charging chip, that's bullshit. I don't have the ability to engage when it comes in that manner, even though I would absolutely love to, because the manufacturer is completely full of shit and they're not acting in good faith. Here, even though this man likely disagrees with me on a number of things ideologically and doesn't like the initiative and is very strong in the criticism of the initiative, that doesn't mean that he's fundamentally lying. He's not paying for a lobbyist to say that magtrometers and microwaves will explode. He's not paying a lobbyist to say that when I change a fuse in a motherboard or when I run a wire, that I'm changing a MacBook into a PC and misrepresenting it to my customer as if it's still a MacBook, which is fraud. The level to which Apple and other manufacturers lie and gaslight politicians and users and their customers to try and trick them into accepting that which they should not accept is insane and completely different from what he's doing. He disagrees. He doesn't like the idea ideologically, in my opinion, and he's poking holes in certain elements that were not fully fleshed out as a result of this being an initiative, not a draft bill, or even if it was a draft bill, you're supposed to poke holes in it. It's not a full bill, but he has ideas on it. And All these people need to be at the table in order to come up with something that makes sense. You do have to consider where they're coming from. You can't just have this oversimplified thing of just don't limit it. You have to understand the way modern infrastructure works. You have to understand the way these games are developed. Am I saying that I changed my mind on any of these things? No, but you still have to dig into the weeds so that you can write legislation that doesn't suck. And when he says stuff like politicians don't really understand gaming, it's not just politicians. The industry lobbyists that are lobbying on behalf of the video game developers against stuff like this don't understand anything.
Of the game console to protect their safeguards against sophisticated theft or piracy, to help the piracy video game software.
The piracy video game software?
To help the piracy video game software.
Do you at least read this into the mirror the night before you show up and testify in front of the committee? Or do you just write this on the bus on the way to the legislative building the same way that I did my earth science homework in 8th grade?
Software and hardware have security features that are built into them, and they're known as technical protection measures or digital locks. These locks prevent the play of any unauthorized game. Put simply, if a video game console's firmware runs a verification check on a game and it is not a legitimate copy, the video game won't play the console. The video game won't play the console. No, but seriously, my favorite part of this is how the lobbyist that's sitting next to her, when she says that the video game will play the console, it's like, oh yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. The video game will play the console. The piracy data, lithium-ion battery, latest security will explode. It's been almost 5 years since I did that video, and every time I hear it, I want to bang my head against the wall. Can you blame me? Anyway, that's it for today, and as always, I hope you learned something. I'll see you all in the next video. Bye now. And if any of you want to talk, by all means, I would love to talk to this dude Thor. I'd love to have go back and forth with Ross Scott on a live stream. I think it would be fun. We could all learn something. It doesn't have to be this adversarial throwing shit at each other thing. Let me know. My email is in the about page of my YouTube channel.